Hi again, everyone. Patrick Fingston here. I write the Illinoize political newsletter, which you can get in your inbox each and every day. Subscribe at the Illinoize, ILLINOIZE.com. We are back with our podcast. It's been on hiatus for a little while, probably since I jumped into daily radio about a year and a half ago now. And we decided one of my resolutions for 2026 was to bring that baby back because we need to have good conversation. It's about what's going on in state government, in politics, in campaigns. It is an election year after all here in 2026. So what we're going to do is try to bring you each and every week as much as we have time. Session weeks will be a little crazy. Sometimes we might mix some live stuff in, but we're going to do our best to be in your feed every week to talk about issues at the Statehouse, campaigns, talk to candidates, talk to people who are following these races and following these candidates, and certainly get a lot of analysis and from the horse's mouth discussion between now and the November election. So we're going to start our 2026 with a discussion about the 2026 legislative session, which kicks off next week at the Statehouse. The Senate comes back the 13th. The House comes back the 20th. Of course, nothing likely to happen in big, significant ways until at least after the primary, and certainly not until May. But we want to talk about the agenda for 2026. So we'll talk to State Representative Kam Buckner, a member of House Speaker Chris Welch's leadership team. We'll talk through a whole lot of issues. We'll look back a little bit on 2025, look ahead a little bit to 2026. And then we'll talk to Brenden Moore, Statehouse reporter for Capital News Illinois, talk a little bit about the major issues facing lawmakers in 2026 and how they plan to address them. So I think they're good discussions. I hope you enjoy them. Of course, subscribe to the podcast in your preferred podcast feeds. We're on Apple, we're on Spotify, we're on Amazon Music. We're also on YouTube. So subscribe to our YouTube page as well. Just search the Illinoize with the Z, ILLINOIZE, and it should pop up. We're excited to get kicked off in 2026, and we are excited to bring you our conversation this week with State Representative Kam Buckner. So as we kind of restart our podcast here in the new year, it's a pleasure to welcome our friend State Representative Kam Buckner, a Democrat from Chicago, somebody who has been in the mix of many of the big issues that have been at the forefront over the last year and will certainly be into the new year. Representative, thanks for taking some time.
Hey, Patrick, happy 2026, my friend. Thanks for having me.
All right, so let's look back here at maybe what I think was one of the major, if not the most major legislative issue of 2025, which was the passage of a major mass transit reform / bailout / whatever term you want to use for it for mass transit. I've been on the record being critical of a portion of the funding of this that you all took about $400 million from downstate roads and bridges and moved the majority of that into mass transit. That's ruffled the feathers of more than a few downstaters. I think in my hyperbolic ways, I think I called it highway robbery. From someone who was in the room in these conversations, and as someone who I'm sure has heard the pushback from folks downstate, what's your response to those who say, hey man, why is money that has been set aside for downstate roads and bridges for decades now being shifted to bail out mass transit in Chicago?
Yeah, so a few things, Patrick, and I, as you know, I respect that point of view. I respect where folks come from when they're saying that. There are a few things I would say to clear things up. I hear the critique that downstate, to some were left unwhole by the transit bill. And respectfully, I want to remind folks that downstate transit did get supercharged, right? For many years, downstate transit agencies were boxed out of money because the local match was too high. They couldn't afford to pay for it. The rules were too rigid. And the system was built around Chicago's needs by default. What this bill, which is now law, what it does is it lowers the barrier to entry and increases the actual dollars available. Not just formulas, but dollars, right? We put extra hundreds of millions of dollars in new operations funding directly into downstate transit. Not capital you can't use, not studies, but actual operations, right? So that keeps buses running in places that have a transit issue right now. We lowered the match from 35% to 25%. That's real money staying in small towns, staying in counties, staying in transit districts, money that they would have otherwise had to raise locally to keep their buses going, which is why you don't hear mayors in some of these small towns in Illinois singing the same song you're singing, because they realize that the larger balance sheet is going to be better because of this. I will also say that the state of Illinois has not been able to spend all the transportation money it already has, right? We're earning $300 million, give or take, a year in interest. And we've just let that money sit in our treasury. And so when we were in this room making the hard decisions, we asked this simple question, right? Why are we hoarding cash while downstate transit agencies are cutting service? The bill, the way it's written, it takes that interest and deploys it. It puts it on buses. It puts it on trains, right? And to me, that's better than sitting in a place where it's not going to be used. The last thing I'll say is that this kind of argument about this is typical of the Illinois argument that we have, right? Chicago versus the rest of the state, because in this iteration, it's become a conversation about roads versus transit. A lot of this debate is framed as that, and that's a false choice, right? Illinois doesn't fund, roads just, by this formula that folks are talking about. We fund it by performance metrics, right? And IDOT, I remind folks, is still under federal asset management rules, right? So that means that bridges and roads get funded based on their condition, on their safety and their usage, not on the politics that we have come to think of when we think about these splits, right? And so that formula has driven about 65% of road investment downstate, and that doesn't change under this bill. In fact, we can't change that. We're mandated to, right? So those targets still have to be hit, and we'll get there. What we did say was that we can meet our road and bridge obligation. We can also do the same thing with transit. And so when you touch a big sticky issue like this, there's no easy way to do it. There's no way to get out of here where everybody's going to be happy. But leadership is finding a way to get it done, and then committing to coming back and fixing and tweaking and changing things as they come along, because this is a generational piece of legislation. It's a generational problem.
As I talk to folks in the city and suburbs who are either for or against it, the two things that I keep hearing are one, suburbanites who are angry that tolls are going up for essentially no reason other than potential long-term improvements that really nobody asked for, and two, that fares were frozen for CTA in a time when they've been frozen for pushing a decade, and there's it feels to some that that those who are using the system should be at least putting a little more skin into the game, even if it's a 25, 50, 75% increase. And suburbanites are paying a disproportionate amount on those tolls that aren't even going to go into transit in the end anyway. So do you mind addressing those two issues?
Oh yeah, so I'll take the second one first, and that would be that I agree. I've been on the record saying that the fact that CTA has not raised fares in a decade is problematic. I said that before we reached a final conclusion on this bill. I said that before then, before we even start talking about reform and revenue adjustment, right? And I truly believe that the fares need to keep up with where we are. Nothing costs the same today that it did 10 years ago. And so we need to be smart about making sure that we do the same, right sizing for transit. What this is, though, however, people are missing the point. This is not saying in a blanket way that CTA cannot raise fares or should not raise fares. It's acknowledging that we have a very, very heavy lift when it comes to this transition. We are getting rid of an entire agency and creating a new one. And there are people and players here that may not be here in 2 years. There are things that we have to reconfigure. And so what we've said is, while we're in chaos over here, let's fix this first, and then we can come back to the drawing board as the new NETA board is set, and then we figure out what fares look like. We don't want CTA, Metro, or PACE either reducing or increasing fares without the data and without the things that we need that we put into this bill for reform. So I think to be able to do this reform and then also give these agencies the ability to have a last-ditch effort on things that we don't necessarily agree with would be foolhardy, right? So this is about being smart and prudent. The second part is that, listen, when back to my earlier point about you can't make everybody happy in this situation. I mean, I literally remember, I'm old enough to remember just a few months ago when people were going crazy over a statewide Uber tax or a statewide delivery tax. And to hear many of those same folks espouse the same views about more targeted taxes that are not statewide, to me, it's crazy. There's an alderman in Chicago who likes to say everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die, right? You can't have it both ways all the time. And the truth of the matter is here, the revenue resources are targeted and they're aligned with use, right? So we've got a tollway increase paid for by people who use the tollway, 30% of which, by the way, might add, do not live in the state of Illinois. We've got a sales tax adjustment within the RTA region where the service actually operates. No one in Macomb or Peoria is paying for the RTA piece, right? And we have a road fund interest piece that uses money that the state was using already. We're already earning but not deploying, right? If someone has a better way of how we could have got there, we were doing this for 3 years, and we were happy to listen. But once again, when you govern and when you lead, you got to do the smart, prudent things. And we will continue to tweak and make adjustments where needed. But this is a deal that doesn't leave the rest of the state on the hook for something they're not using.
Is this issue settled, or is there anything that may need to be fixed or tweaked or that would need to be back on the front burner in 2026? I've had a couple of people say, hey, I don't think they're done here. What's your anticipation?
Yeah. I mean, this is huge, right? I mean, anytime I've worked on a big bill in Springfield, we've always had to come back. I think this will be no different. I know there was some drafting things in particular that folks brought up where I know we went on the record on the floor to solidify intent, and we may have to go back and change those things. Some number tweaks, and I think there were some very small wording issues on some things, but there may be larger issues, right? As we peel back the behemoth that is RTA and we transition, we may find more things, which is part of the reason that we said let's get NETA up and running. Let's figure out if we missed anything, and we will come back. Patrick, I always say this, and I know it's not popular for politicians to say it, but I reserve the right to be wrong, and I'm happy to listen and to figure out if we have done something that needs to be tweaked. And my commitment is there to the folks around the state, but particularly my colleagues downstate who I've had these private conversations with, who are concerned that if something is really untoward based on the way that this is going to work in real life, then we need to go back and fix it.
So not to make this entire conversation about you just defending things that I'm upset about, but hey, this is where we're at. I've been critical of the energy package that you all passed at the end of veto session. That I felt, and I think there are people that agree with me, a lot of people that agree with me, that doesn't actually help people who saw our electric bills, ComEd, Ameren throughout the state double, triple in places, especially commercial, small business, those sort of things that were eating up their budgets. Is there going to be a real push in 2026 to do something to lower energy bills? Because I don't think, and I think some of your colleagues may have lied through their teeth to me on this, but I don't think you're one of those that, I mean, you look at what that bill does, and it literally doesn't lower anybody's energy cost.
Yeah, let me, and I don't want to avoid the initial question, so I want to actually answer that first, or respond to that first. I understand the trepidation around the energy package. As you know, I was a little busy during the end of session between budget and transit. And then transit again in the time between session and veto session beginning. But I know there were a lot of people in that room having a lot of conversations, and they landed where they landed. Do I think it's the best version of a bill that we can have? No. Once again, no piece of perfect legislation, but all legislation can be perfected. I don't know for sure how this is going to work in real life. Like if the things that are supposed to be implemented in a way that's supposed to give relief, if they're going to happen, I have the same concerns you do, because, while I have constituents and I'm one of those people whose bills skyrocketed over the summer, but I also got family members downstate in places like Champaign and Danville and Moments, who blew my phone up this summer, telling me about how much Amarin had hiked them, right? And so I share those concerns. To answer the second question, we have to do something, right? You and I chatted a little bit yesterday just about affordability, right? And affordability, as far as I'm concerned, I know the president has said it's a made up term, and we won't get into all that. But to me, affordability can't just be something that people see in paper or in press releases or in headlines, right? They have to feel it every single day. And if we can't make things more affordable, including utility bills, then we're going to have a hard time keeping folks here. And as you know, from me, one of the things I care about most is growing Illinois. And we got to be able to show folks that they can live here and raise a family here and pay bills without robbing Peter to pay Paul.
I think that leads us into the 2026 conversation as what we're going to run into as we head back to the Statehouse later this month, is the affordability question, right? I mean, it is objectively very expensive to live in this state, and especially the farther north you go, and it seems like, it seems to me, and you may disagree with my observation here, and that's fine, that in 2024 nationally, but it certainly hurt Democrats that they didn't pay attention to, focus on, have a solution for the affordability, the cost of living issues, the inflation impact from the Biden administration. Certainly Trump seized on that at the time, and now he's trying to pretend like it's not happening to him. But it seems that while Democrats didn't pay the price in terms of seats, in terms of how it could have hurt them in 2024 in Illinois, Kamala Harris underperformed Joe Biden significantly. You all lost some races you probably thought you should have won. You barely won some races you thought you should have won handily, if you look down the ballot. It seems like your party got the message somewhere that cost of living and affordability is the thing in 2026. So how do you address it? How do we actually make it more affordable to live in this state?
Yeah, so I think that's, first off, I think the premise of the question is absolutely right. And we know this. Anybody that's ever studied politics and political science understands that inflation is an incumbent killer, and we've seen that over and over again at every level of government. But what also is true is for anybody who's doing this job that I do, or any jobs adjacent to this job that I get the opportunity to do, when you're talking to folks on their doorsteps or at the grocery store or at the barber shop or at the Little League baseball game, what they're talking about is the fact that their pockets are hurting. They're talking about how it's getting harder and harder to make ends meet. They're talking about what they've got to do in order to afford their lifestyle. They're talking about whether or not they have to make a decision between buying pharmaceuticals for their sickness and or paying for their kids' school bill because they don't trust the public school down the street. Right. So I think all of these things are things we got to have real conversations about. We talked a little bit about utility bills. That's one big one. We talked about groceries, right? Not just the grocery tax, but the price of eggs and milk and gas is rising, and people are having a hard time keeping up. We talked about insurance and insurance premiums in the way that they're skyrocketing. We're talking about junk fees and the things that hit people in the pocket every single day. And then the biggest one that a lot of Illinoisans are faced with every day is property taxes. And the truth of the matter is that by the way that our system is designed, the reason that these property taxes have continued to increase, there's a lot of different reasons, but one of them is that we keep pushing down some of these larger costs to municipal and county governments, and they've got to find a way to wiggle out of it, right? And so property taxes cannot be the silver bullet. They cannot be the panacea. They're going to drive people away. And so we have to be very clear about what property tax relief and reform looks like. We've got to be very clear about what affordability looks like. Childcare, what are people paying for that? Housing costs, like what are people paying for rent and mortgages? And do we have more housing coming in the queue, right? What's our housing stock and start data look like? These are all things that we have to do in order to grow Illinois. And Patrick, you heard me say this before, that we can deal, if we had a magic wand and we dealt with all of our issues like public safety and transit and the environment and energy and all of those things that you and I have fun talking about on a normal basis, it will not erase the fact that we've got some legacy debt, right, through pensions and other things that we've got to get to. And the only way you get to those things is not by finding more ways to tax people, it's having more people to throw into the pot, right? More of a tax base in this state. And we can only do that if we're growing, if we're thriving, if we're a place that people want to start businesses and start families. And that has to be a part of our entire package moving forward, right? So when I say affordability, it's not just making sure that the price monthly is lower, it's make sure that the economy and the ecosystem is healthier.
But I think the follow-up there is how, right? Because while you all like to take a lot of credit for the grocery tax repeal, most of the municipalities in this state put their own grocery tax right into place because they didn't want to have that hole in their budgets that politicians on the state level were taking credit for. You know, the state doesn't do a property tax or doesn't, levy a property tax. So if you're going to give schools enough money to abate or rebate some of those property tax dollars, it's going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars at least. When we're talking about housing prices, when we're talking about grocery prices, these are things that it's hard for the legislature itself to govern, other than put more money in our pockets by cutting taxes, which is, right, the old Republican trope. So other than that, what's the way that Democrats actually tackle these real issues? I know the political buzzword that I hate is kitchen table issues, but these are the things that seriously impact people's lives, going from energy bills to property taxes to paying their rent to buying groceries, childcare, as you mentioned. We've got little guys that are the same age, right? That takes a big chunk out of our budget. How do you actually address it?
Once again, we got to be smart about what type of tool our budget can be to make sure that some of these larger costs on folks don't continue to hit them over the head, right? Once again, when we underfund schools, locals will raise their property taxes. When pensions aren't responsibly managed, locals will raise their taxes. When the state cuts or caps revenue, locals raise their taxes, right? So we know the cause and effect here. But this can't just be the legislature, right? The legislature has to be a willing partner and participant in this conversation. But this is where the full force of government has to come together. This is where we need our congressional delegation to be very active in Washington, D.C. This is where we need county board presidents around the state, all 102 of them, to come to Springfield and be a part of this affordability conversation. This is where we need mayors and village managers to be a part of the conversation. We can't do this in a silo. And you're right, Patrick. I don't have an answer for how state Democrats snap their fingers and do things other than what we've already been working on to make everything better. It can't just be one entity. We've got to work together across party lines, across sectors of government, to have a real war on the lack of affordability. And if we can find a way to get that right, I can tell you it'll be the model for the nation. That takes a lot of political will. It takes a lot of concentration and determination. But it's something that the people of the state deserve, because as I've told you before, they rely on us to be a stabilizer in a very chaotic time. And we got to find a way this year and beyond to try to do that.
Two more things before we get you out of here. The first is there's an element of your party, your caucuses, your coalition that want to put a referendum on the ballot later this year, either for the progressive tax, the graduated income tax that failed before voters in 2020. Essentially, I think Mark Walker's language was, we've got to sell people that it's a tax cut for 95% of people, and the millionaires and billionaires, in my Bernie Sanders voice, that get hosed because of it. Or there's the Pat Quinn effort that would put the millionaire surcharge into the Constitution. There is certainly I mean, you sit in the House Democratic Caucus meetings. I only get the text messages about what's happening. But
not for me.
Did you hear that, Mr. Speaker? Not from Kam. But certainly there are members of your caucuses, House and Senate Democrats, that want to spend more and do more. Right? They feel like Democrats got these super majorities not to go and do austerity, not to go and cut social service programs, et cetera. So they want more money when the state's already blown its spending up from 39 to 55 billion in the time JB Pritzker has been governor. So is a graduated income tax, is a millionaire surcharge, is that something you support in November?
So I'm going to answer that question two different ways. Is a graduated progressive income tax something I support? Yes. Is it something that needs to happen in November? I don't know. And the reason I'm saying I don't know, Patrick, is because I feel way too often we get locked in on this idea of fairness in our tax structure, which we desperately need. But I think we've forgotten the politics part of it, right? Sometimes politicians forget how to be politicians. And so much of this is political. When people hear you say the word taxes, doesn't matter if it's a tax on your neighbor, a tax on your enemy. When they hear taxes, they think about themselves, right? If we go this route again, we got to do a better job of three things. One, first, people have to see you do more with less, right? We have to be very clear that we can manage. And I think we're doing a better job of that, right? Not just because of the bond and credit ratings and all that stuff, but like people got to be able to feel it, all right? So first got to prove you can do more with less and show some transparency and some accountability. People like that. They need that and they deserve it. The second thing you've got to do is to state specifically where these taxes, not just who they're hitting, but where they're going to go. Show it, prove it, right? People all around the state talk about the quote unquote lottery scam from the 1970s and whether or not it was real or it was a scam or a shell game or a Ponzi scheme, whatever you want to call it. It was sold because it was very clear. It was said very clearly, this is going to education, right? So people need to see that part too. And then the third part is they've got to be able to feel what happens if we don't do it, right? They got to be able to hear that in a cogent way. I think those are the three rules of asking anybody to raise anybody's taxes. And I think we may have missed that last time. And so, yes, I support a progressive income tax. I don't know because I've not been the person who's working on this. I know some of my colleagues are, and I trust guys like Mark Walker, who I think is brilliant and has spent a lot of time working the ins and outs of this. And I've even had conversations as recently as a couple of weeks ago with Governor Quinn about this. But we got to make sure that we're ready to do this and do it the right way. We can't fail at this twice, right? The other thing I would just say is just to one of your points. A large share of Illinois' budget growth since, I guess I saw an article this morning that said 2018, it reflects inflation. It reflects federally required spending. It reflects debt payments that we're obligated to make legally. A lot of this is not discretionary expansion, right? Second, Illinois' government and spending didn't grow because the economy was booming. We grew government because for decades, this government has underfunded its obligations, right? Pensions, schools, infrastructure, and eventually the bill has come due. And so catching up on past neglect looks like rapid growth on paper, but the truth of the matter is it's actually delayed payment. It's not excess. And so we should be honest about that. We're going to talk about the budget and spending and all that. We should talk about where we came from and how we get here.
What about fair maps? Is that a since we're talking about referenda? I mean, you and I have gone back and forth on gerrymandering and redistricting and what happened in 2021 in this state. But is changing the way maps are drawn in the state to take power out of politicians' hands, Republicans or Democrats, whoever's in charge, and Republicans used to be in charge. They may be lost in the woods now, but they've been in charge before. Is that whether it's this amendment or not, is it something that you would support even in theory?
Yeah, I would. And Patrick, I think the real reason is we should always be in touch and in line with what the populace and the electorate, excuse me, um, wants and what they're thinking. And I think we've entered a new phase in American politics, not just in this state, but in this country, where folks are asking, is there a way to do things differently? Is there a way to do things better? I can say in a very balanced and aggressive way that the people of this country were flabbergasted when it came to what President Trump tried to do in Texas. I think there were equally folks in California who looked at what California tried to do to respond that were not happy. And there are also folks who looked at our neighbors to the east in Indiana, folks like me who lauded those Republican senators who pushed back on their remapping efforts because they were the wrong thing to do for democracy. We're in a weird spot where every single entity, whether it's the courts or the state legislatures, we kind of feel like we're the fulcrum of democracy. We're the thing that is keeping this thing together. And with all this going on around us, people are looking for more ways to have a purer form of this government, right? We are this year entering 250 years as a country. And anybody who studies history knows that that's about the shelf life for a democracy. We don't usually last past 250. And if this republic is going to last, then we've got to do some things differently. And so I welcome the conversation about representation and how we draw maps and how this works. We should be open to having that conversation and not be scared of it.
All right, last thing now, and we could probably do a full half hour on this topic alone, but I got to get you out of here. The Bears, which has been a complete and epic disaster off the field. Well, it's been great on the field. I'll let you just unwind where your brain is at this point. But we got the note from Kevin Warren 2 days before the Packers game, again, separate the on the field and off the field thing, where they were open to new ideas, open to moving to Indiana, go to Kenosha if you want, I don't care. They continue to have asks for Arlington Heights. I mean, we've still got this gigantic bill on the books for the renovation that happened in 2002. We both still in high school. I graduated in 2002.
I was a junior. Yeah.
So I mean, it's been on the books as long as we've been, since we got out of high school, and not to mention the fact that how does the state pay for whatever those things might be? Mark Walker, again, who we talked about, who represents that Arlington Park site, said, hey, we need to at least have a conversation about infrastructure because we have those conversations with big businesses all over the state, but we shouldn't give them things because they're the Bears, and we shouldn't stop things because they're the Bears. And then there's just the full-on lack of goodwill that they now have at in the General Assembly because of how they've bungled this whole mess. So I set the table for you there. I'm going to let you, as the kids say, I'm going to let you cook and just kind of unload where your head is at with the Bears for me on this.
Well, Patrick, it's funny that you say this way because I was just literally thinking last night. I was leaving the grocery store and I was thinking, we've got 4 days until the most important playoff game that the Bears have hosted in 40 years. And so that means it's just about time for Kevin Warren to drop a letter to the fans pronouncing nothing, right? I don't understand what they're doing or why they're doing it. Two things I'll point out, and I'll get a little bit more into the details. I think first off, we got to start with the fact that thank God what's happening on the field is happening on the field because the things that are happening in Hallis Hall are problematic. First off, we should call out the fact that I spent just as much time of my life in the private sector as I have in the public sector, and I still work in the private sector outside of this job. And in no time or iteration of my work in the private sector, could I have done something like purchase $200 million worth of land without a plan for how to actually get it to be usable. They had no tax certainty when they purchased it. They had no agreement with anybody but themselves. They hadn't spoken to Springfield about anything. And so that was the first mistake they made. And this was pre-Kevin Warren. And now in this era, They keep making these pronouncements every few months about nothing, except for they're changing their direction, right? So it's Chicago, it's Arlington Heights, now it's Indiana. I just don't know in what structure or setting it's okay to keep on releasing letters or press releases that literally say nothing. It's like the old Saturday Night Live skit, Generalissimo Francisco Franco is still dead. Yeah, he is still dead. Nothing has changed, right? So I don't understand that part. But to the nuts and bolts of this, they have lost any goodwill they've had in Springfield for a number of reasons. One was the last letter that came out talked about, all we've asked the state for is property tax certainty and infrastructure, and no one wants to play ball with us. Governor J.B. Pritzker, Senate President Don Harmon, Speaker Chris Welch, Ann Caprera, Senator Mark Walker, Representative Mary Beth Canty, Kam Buckner, the folks who have been a part of this conversation have all said infrastructure is a normal and organic part of conversations like these. Let's have them. The Bears have refused to, as my fifth grade math teacher would say, show their work. They thought that they were going to be able just to get a blank check like they always have, and that's not the way it's going to work in this day and age. You mentioned 2002. I was a junior working as a guest service relations manager, usher, at Soldier Field during the last game of that season when they played the Philadelphia Eagles, and Donovan McNabb came home and beat the Bears. And the moment the last person left Soldier Field, I literally saw the wrecking ball coming in, knocking down seats. That renovation happened immediately that night. And to think now, 25 years later, here we are having this conversation, and we still owe $500 million on that. It's crazy. So I don't know what they're doing. Don't know how they're going to do it. Hopefully they can, get over this, win this game this weekend, go as far as they can, come back to Springfield, have a conversation without threatening to go to Indiana.
Can they repair this relationship at this point, or is it too toxic to be fixed?
I think it's repairable. It's reparable. They've got to push the reset button. They've got to say, hey, we messed up. We should have did this a little differently. This is what we want to do, and this is our true hand. I actually tried to give them a route to do that, Patrick, by saying this should not be their contract lobbyists coming down to Springfield. This should not be Kevin Warren at this point. I think people want to see George McCaskey. I think the family needs to be down there having a conversation. As I've said before, if they can do it in Las Vegas and in Minnesota, where Kevin Warren came from, where the actual owners went to the legislature and had a public conversation, then great. If Jerry Reinsdorf can find Springfield on his GPS, I bet you McCaskey can too.
All right, we'll leave it at that. State Representative Kam Buckner, a pleasure as always. And here's the thing, right? In politics, especially, and this is a Republican and Democrat thing, right? There are a lot of politicians who don't want to confront difficult issues. And every single time you and I talk on the radio, every single time we chat in person or do something for the podcast or the newsletter, you always take on these issues with me, and I certainly appreciate it. I think one thing we can definitely agree on is we are all things
that's right,
Illinois.
baby.
So looks great with the green flannel jacket, but I think we got to at least finish agreeing on this topic as well. So, Representative, appreciate the time as always. Look forward to seeing you at the Statehouse, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Patrick. Happy New Year, man.
You too. Thanks to Representative Buckner for his time. Good conversation. Former Illini football player, so he had the Illini hat on. I had to match it a little bit. Messed up my hair a little. Such is life. If you're not watching on the YouTube feed, you don't get to see that. But let's turn our attention now to the journalist perspective as we have a conversation with Brenden Moore of Capital News Illinois. All right, let's turn our attention to the Statehouse itself. Brenden Moore of Capital News Illinois joins us from the basement of the Statehouse as we record here on Thursday morning. Brenden, Happy New Year. Next week, things get back into sort of normal as lawmakers return to the Statehouse.
Yeah, Patrick, Happy New Year to you. We're slowly ramping up. Senate comes back next week, the House the week after. They didn't synchronize very well, but nevertheless, we'll be happy to see them.
I wrote a little story about that earlier in the or before the new year, and it was just like it seems like the two sides don't coordinate schedules anymore, which is lovely for those of us that have to be down there all the time. So, all right, I did a story this week, essentially asking a bunch of Democrats, what do you want to do this year? right? It's an election year, so things big things very rarely get done anyway. But we're looking square in the face of at least a $2 billion budget deficit, which could get worse if the economy tanks. You seem to have these progressive parts of the House and Senate Democratic caucuses that want to put a progressive or graduated income tax referendum on the ballot, which will surely make lives difficult for some Democrats in tough races legislatively in November. But it really came down to Democrats talking about cost of living, right? It was childcare, groceries, property taxes, but there seem to be very few solutions out there to these things. So what do we actually expect Democrats to focus on this spring?
I think you really just hit on it. It's going to be affordability. That's the number one issue on everybody's minds, not just in Illinois, but I mean, any race you're running in the country right now, it's all about cost of living. And so I think there's going to be a heavy emphasis on that. I mean, you mentioned that, it's an election year, that usually there's not a lot of heavy lifting on policy in an election year. The governor signed a big energy bill today. They got transit done. So you got a lot of heavy lift items off your plate. And so you can focus on the budget. There's going to have to be a big focus on the budget because there are some projections showing a $2.2 billion deficit for fiscal year 27 that has to be addressed. But then also, what are some of the ways that you can make things a little more affordable for folks in their lives? The governor and Democrats will point in past years to ending the statewide grocery tax, which is kind of in name only because a lot of local municipalities basically adopted their own. They've done some stuff with the child tax credit, expanding that at the state level. They've done some stuff kind of on the margins. But I think the real challenge is going to be the uncertainty with the budget, that we're not in the same situation we were in 2022 when you had all this federal stimulus money and you had tax receipts that were through the roof, post-COVID economic activity, and that allowed for the Governor Pritzker and Democrats to basically offer a bunch of one-time tax relief, suspending the gas tax, suspending the grocery tax, and a few other items of that nature. I don't know if that's going to be feasible this time around. I guess we're going to have to wait and see for the governor to propose his budget in February, because the reports come out usually in October or November, kind of giving an idea of where revenue might be, but we really don't know until we get the governor's folks release their numbers in February around the budget address. So a lot of uncertainty still, but I think affordability is undoubtedly going to be top of the agenda.
And Pritzker hasn't laid out, an agenda yet, and certainly probably won't until he does his State of the State and budget address, and even a lot of the things he laid out last year, like 4-year degrees at community colleges and things like that really didn't get a lot of traction last year, and everybody ended up so laser focused on the budget at the end of the year, or at the end of the session, and transit, of course, which got pushed to the fall. What's J.B. Pritzker's role in this affordability message going to look like? Because he really took a back seat until the very end on some of these big issues like transit in October. Remember, he poo-pooed the House bill. Then his people got involved, and all of a sudden we have a bill 12 hours later, right? So when he gets involved, things happen for better or worse. But is he going to take an active policy role here? Do we have any sense from his people?
We'll see what he proposes. He will, because when he gives his budget address, it's also a State of the State address, and usually he outlines some of his top priorities that can be budgetary but also non-budgetary. I think he will be taking kind of a front seat role in this affordability issue, because remember, his name is on the ballot this year. He's running for re-election to a third term. He's not a dummy when it comes to politics. I mean, he can read a poll. He knows, kind of the pulse of his voters. And he knows that even in Illinois, to get reelected, you have to focus on the things that are on people's minds. And that is, paying the bills, paying the rent, paying the groceries, the paying at the pump, although gas is getting a little bit better now. But
still more expensive than it was a year ago, by the way.
Yeah.
They did freeze the inflation adjustment for this year. So it didn't go up from 43 to whatever it was going to go up to this year. So, I mean, there was a little bit of relief in that regard.
Yeah. And so but I do think though that he will get involved in some, there will be some, I don't want to call them pet issues, but there will be some issues that he takes a particular interest in that he will try to get through the legislature this year. I mean, in the past, we've seen a lot of stuff when it comes to insurance reform. We've seen it with health insurance, taking on, banning junk insurance, taking on, price gouging by insurance companies. Last year there was an unsuccessful effort to reform homeowners insurance after some pretty big rate hikes from State Farm. So I would expect him to make another effort at that. Some of these more maybe populist type of issues, because, I don't know anybody that likes their insurance company or likes their insurance policy. So I'm sure he'll stay in that space. I don't know how much room there is going to be in the budget to do tax relief, but Democrats every year have tried to up the child tax credit and try to give some relief to lower income, middle income people. But that might be difficult if we do have a tight budget year. So I would expect there to be, whether it is kind of really budget related or just some signaling of, we get it, things are expensive, and we're going to do our best to try to make things more affordable on some of those insurance issues, for instance. I would expect him to take a lead role. His people are very tight-lipped. They usually don't. We don't hear a whole lot until maybe a few days before he gives his address in February, kind of what he's going to be leading on. But undoubtedly he will, because it's not just a policy discussion. I mean, it's political. His name's on the ballot along with a lot of legislators this year.
And we'll get into the graduated tax part of this, because I think there are some progressives that see that as sort of a panacea, right? That all that new money coming in from taxing the, insert your Bernie Sanders millionaires and billionaires would solve all these problems, would reduce property taxes immediately. But even if it does pass in November, if it were on the ballot and did pass in November, you don't even start taxing it until July of 2027, after the new fiscal year takes effect. So we're looking at this $2 billion budget hole this year, with an economy that I think people smarter than me would say is at risk of kind of having the bottom fall out. And they've already tapped so many of these one-time tax increases, so many of these sin taxes, things like that in the last two budget years, plus the things that they did to get the transit bill passed in the fall. It's I have to wonder if a regular general income tax increase won't be on the agenda as a last ditch solution, because I've had progressive lawmakers tell me, we didn't get sent here to do austerity. We didn't get sent here to do cuts. So you're going to have a really hard time finding the votes for major hundreds of millions or billions in cuts. So they've got to find that money somewhere, right?
Yeah, and I mean, and again, there's still a lot that we need. We don't know about what the numbers are going to be next year. I mean, the Commission on Government Forecasting and Accountability did put out a report a few days ago that showed that at least in this current budget year, that the revenues are actually up a bit, and it looks like the state's going to end in the black ink this fiscal year. So that's a positive sign. But as you said, I mean, next fiscal year we're going to start to see a lot of these cuts coming from the federal government, and then perhaps economic slowdown will slow sales tax and income tax receipts, and it may lead to those questions. And I wrote about this last week, or I guess earlier this week, about the talk about do we go for the graduate income tax again? And I think there's at least going to be an appetite for a policy discussion about it, because if you look at the One Big Beautiful Bill Act at the federal level, I mean, the folks at the very top are making out pretty good in that. They're going to get the disproportionate amount of the tax relief in that bill. So if you're a state lawmaker, you can maybe make the argument that well, we have to recoup some of that, especially because some of the cuts to pay for those tax cuts are coming in the forms of less social spending on Medicaid, less spending on SNAP, and things of that nature. But it's still a very, very politically tough thing to do in an election year, is to talk about raising taxes. The governor has said it's not a priority of his. I think it's mostly in progressive circles. I think there's going to be the governor has said this whenever you ask him about it, is that, and he was asked about this when Chicago was trying to put its budget together, about, when the mayor was trying to get his head tax through that didn't get through, that, well, the first thing you got to do is got to look for cuts everywhere. So I think there will be an exercise in finding cuts and trying to see where you can find efficiencies, and try to make it work within the existing framework, because a tax increase anytime is a tough vote, but especially when your name is on a ballot, and so I wouldn't anticipate that happening. I mean, perhaps they get it on the ballot, whether it is the progressive income tax or Governor Quinn's millionaires tax proposal, which is more of a populist bent on
make
that.
The will of the people the law of the land. Ever heard that?
Right. One too many times. No.
But let me ask you then, Brenden, about the progressive tax, about the graduated income tax. I mean, there seems to be a group of Democrats that really wants to see this on the ballot in November. The governor has long said he supported it, even, put $60 million into the failed referendum in 2020. Is there going to be real momentum to do this in November?
Again, I think it's unlikely. I think you would really need the governor to put his full political weight behind it, and that's not happening. I mean, I don't think this is something that can happen if it is just something coming from the most progressive corners of the legislature. Although Speaker Welch was at the City Club a few days ago, and he mentioned something about how the state is going to have to figure out structurally how to find more revenue in the coming years, because we still have a structural budget deficit. I mean, which basically means that the expected expenditures outweigh expected revenues, assuming no new laws, no new like the law as it is, that our tax structure doesn't make a lot of sense, in the sense that we have a flat income tax, that we have sales tax that does not capture a lot of services, does not capture a lot of like what the modern economy is. And that's what the advocates would say, and they say that we need to do some things to balance that out. But then you also have the folks that say, and rightfully say, that I think a lot of people are already pretty taxed out between state taxes and local property taxes. And that, if you did do a graduated tax, it would have to be coupled with some language about property tax relief. I think that's probably the thing, and funding to education, of course, which again is kind of already tied, because most of our property taxes go towards funding education. But they've had this policy discussion's been going on for years. I mean, this was you remember, even Jim Edgar back in the day proposed the swap of, higher income tax for lower property taxes, and it just, it never goes anywhere. So I'm skeptical, especially, but it could change again if the governor gets on board, puts more money behind it. I could see it. And I think maybe the political environment may be a little bit different than it was in 2020. Speaker Madigan's gone. I think the cloud hanging over him at that time, as he was being investigated, I think made a lot of people distrustful of Springfield, and like, we don't want to give money to these people because we don't trust them to spend it wisely. You still probably get some of that skepticism, but also, Illinois is a blue state. It's a midterm year. Trump is in the White House. And so you're probably gonna get pretty good turnout among your base. And, you might get depressed turnout on the Republican side because, as we've seen the past several cycles, they don't do as well when his name is not on the ticket. So, if you wanted to get it done, maybe this year is the best opportunity to do it. But there has to be political will to do it. And I haven't seen it so far beyond talking to some of the progressives, some of the usual suspects who have been talking about this for forever and ever.
I'll get you out of here on this, Brenden. It's the Bears, of course, minus the whole beat Green Bay thing this weekend. My Bears fandom I've had to try and keep the disaster that is what Kevin Warren's PR machine out of Hallis Hall has been with the team, which has actually been a saving grace this year. But the team seems to have lost all goodwill at the Statehouse in terms of whether it's something on the lakefront, whether it's Arlington Heights. Now this threat to move to Indiana or Kenosha or Des Moines, Iowa, I don't know, wherever. I've had some people who are closer to the inside than me that tell me the Indiana threat is not an empty threat. I think a lot of people in the Statehouse or in the Capitol think that it's an empty threat. Is there going to be any movement on the Bears on the legislative front this spring?
Not in the framework that the Bears have in mind. I don't see any way that has anywhere close to the support it would need to pass the legislature, and as importantly, Governor Pritzker's signature. They have a math problem. It's just hard to see any legislator representing a part of the city of Chicago who would vote to give the Bears tax relief to leave the city of Chicago while the state and the city still owe $500 million on Soldier Field renovations. And it's hard to see folks, maybe outside of, folks who are in, Northwest Cook County around where this, the Arlington Heights Stadium would be, to vote for this. It just, it does not, and it kind of, I think a lot of lawmakers say it would be viewed as out of touch. We were talking all about affordability a few minutes ago, and lawmakers say that's the message that they hear when they go to the doors, that they don't hear about, giving tax relief to a business that's valued at $9 billion. And I think the overwhelming sentiment is among people in the Capitol in Springfield is that it's not the state of Illinois' problem that the McCaskies are cash poor billionaires. They have the land. They have this very, very valuable asset, and that they should figure out a way to build their own stadium without having a state subsidy. But that said, the governor and lawmakers have all said, we will do infrastructure. We will build you a new lane, on Euclid Avenue, or ramps, or traffic lights, sewer stuff, like stuff that they do all the time for new businesses that are coming into the state or expanding or what have you. But I just don't see the property tax angle working. I think that it's kind of been a futile effort. You talked about losing all goodwill. I don't know if they ever had goodwill in this building. They kind of fumbled this effort, no pun intended, from the very beginning. But again, they're the Chicago Bears. I think everybody's going to be watching on Saturday, hoping they beat the Packers.
Except Mike Quigley, apparently.
No, I
hear about that?
No.
Mike Quigley, congressman from Chicago, who's going to run for mayor in 2027, admitted, I think it was to the Sun-Times, that he's a Packers fan.
Oh, goodness. I mean,
so you can take Mike Quigley's mayoral chances off the board at this point. But
well, I was going to say, is he? I mean, I know he's a North Side congressman. Is he from the South Side originally? Because there are some South Side Packer fans.
Well, he lives right across the street from Wrigley Field, so I mean, he's not, or at least near Wrigley Field. I mean, so it's not like he's a South Sider by current nature. But who knows? That's a different question for another day, which we'll have to press him on when we talk to him. But it's going to be an interesting spring as always. We didn't even talk about energy. We're recording Thursday morning after the governor signed the woefully inadequate energy bill that doesn't actually lower anybody's energy costs. So we'll see if somebody brings some better idea forward this spring. So it's going to be an interesting few months, to say the least. So Brenden Moore, Capital News Illinois, appreciate the time as always, and we'll see you around the building soon.
Always a pleasure, Patrick.
All right, thanks to Brenden Moore of Capital News Illinois. Appreciate his time. What we're going to do over the next few weeks and months is try to have conversations across the spectrum, right? I can't do 1 week Democrat, 1 week Republican, 1 week House, 1 week Senate. It doesn't work like that. There are too many. There are too many Democrats and not enough Republicans to do one for one. But schedules and issues and those sort of things make that a little bit unfeasible. But we're going to try to have voices from both parties. Some are voices you hear a lot, like Kam Buckner's. Some are going to be voices you don't hear a lot. And we're going to give a platform here to lots of different perspectives, lots of different voices at the Statehouse, because I think we need that. We need these more long form discussions that aren't 20-second sound bites on your TV newscast at night, which are dwindling in their importance. So thanks so much for taking time to join us in our first episode of 2026. Let us know your thoughts. Drop us a note at mailbag@theillinoise.com. Find us on social media. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We still call it Twitter around here. Follow us. Send us a note. Let us know what you're thinking, what you want to hear us talk about. We're an open book around here. Look forward to spending 2026 with you. Thanks so much for listening to the Illinoize Podcast. We'll talk to you again next time.